Hey everybody, glad to be able to talk with you today about the opportunities for music in the blockchain, and hopefully we'll get moving. So why does the industry need blockchain? There's quite a few reasons. We'll take a look at one of the primary ones, which is data silos. We've got digital service providers, there are the collection societies around the world, labels, publishers. Everybody's maintaining a different set of data about musical works. And this data often does not match up with itself. So we have no single point of truth as to the balance between composition and master rights. So a composition is the written work, the composer who wrote the song. The master right is for the recording. And with these different data silos that I mentioned, we have a huge problem in that like a digital service provider may know who the master rights are, but they have no idea who the composition rights go to. So this creates a lot of conflict. And so this leads to attribution and royalty problems for the creators. It's a huge mess. In fact, it takes up to 2 years for artists to get paid for their works. You can think about Visa being able to transact 80,000 transactions a second, or in milliseconds or whatever. It takes years to get artists paid because the money's moving through all of these various channels, and when the data isn't accurate and doesn't match up, or it's just missing or inaccurate, this leads to these enormous delays with the payments landscape. So what's the blockchain nirvana for the music industry? This is one of my favorite quotes. If anybody knows who actually said this, please come up and let me know, because I think this really sums it up. Blockchain is a technology that allows natively digital transfer of value. And even though music has moved into being mostly digital in terms of the revenues, streaming surpassed sales of physical products. It's the way that the data is being managed is kind of more in an analog fashion. So we've got digital services and the data is being managed in a more analog manner. I'll give you an example. One of the labels I work with, they get their reports from Spotify, and the monthly reporting about streaming data runs up to 200,000 lines for a very small indie label out of Portland, Oregon. The spreadsheets are so large that they have to be FTP'd. And so this is how a lot of data is moving across the industry. Every single time you click play on Spotify, it's generating a new line in a spreadsheet. And that's got to move through the digital service providers, it's got to go to the collection societies, it's got to go to the labels, the publishers, and this is why we've got such a huge mess. So a solution would be a central repository for rights information. There was an attempt a few years ago. It was known as the Global Repertoire Database. It was a project that was started by the industry to try to do this, and it fell apart over the issue of who would own the data, who would control the data. And at the time, there was no blockchain solution. I think Bitcoin was just getting started, but there was no data solution for that could provide a means of creating a database that's owned in the commons, that's fully decentralized. And this is so applicable because the industry's drowning in data. Like I mentioned, the indie label having to process a couple 100,000 lines every single month from streaming from one particular service. If you can imagine this on the whole, going through all these different data silos, it's absolutely monstrous. I've been told, I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but GEMA, the German Collection Society, they are so inefficient with processing the data from streaming that the cost of manipulating that data, processing it, is basically just a wash. So the revenue that's coming out of the DSPs for streaming royalties is basically just nullified because of the processing of the data is so cumbersome. So what would be the solution? The solution: build a system that is first creator-centric, so you can put the rights back and control back into the hands of the artists. And we do this by having files going through something like IPFS, attach metadata using Koala IP through BigchainDB, and have smart contracts via Ethereum. And this would also open up a whole bunch of new opportunities not just to help process data as I mentioned in terms of the problems there, but the opportunity for remixing is tremendous. Sync rights and all this could explode in lots of new different areas. And of course, it also creates a bit of future-proof possibility for VR, AR, and AI. We'll hear from Trent about the AI question. I do have a lot of trepidation about AI when it comes to the music business, and I think there's quite a lot of reason to believe that services like Spotify and Amazon will end up leading this charge, because they are very mainstream services that are oriented around very simplistic kind of search terms. The biggest search term for music on the Amazon Alexa, or biggest command rather, is play me some music. A lot of the big top playlists through Spotify are things like music to sleep to, or music to do a workout to. So I think we'll end up seeing a lot of emergence there with AI-generated types of music, and building a blockchain system could help kind of future-proof us against that. So this leads to what kind of formed out of this process of collaborating with BigchainDB. I first got to really get to know the team last year at the Music Tech Fest. Shout out to Michaela Magas, who's out in the back. You'll be hearing from her, I think, today or tomorrow. And did a blockchain lab, brought together a bunch of people across the industry. And because it was in Berlin, and I started hearing about all these Ascribe/BigchainDB people, invited them to come down. And it was just a couple of short months after that I got a couple of their developers, Alberto and Tim, to go to lunch. And I was so excited. I was going to pitch them this whole idea about artist rights on the blockchain and how we could use BigchainDB. And I got to the meeting a few minutes late and discovered that the conversation they were having was they were talking about Koala IP. And it was basically the exact idea that I was hoping to pitch them on. So we got to do one of the first experiments with Koala IP to start publishing metadata. And this led to bringing together a bunch of different organizations like ourselves, Resonate, we're a streaming music cooperative. Ujo Music, they did one of the first tests with Imogen Heap on doing smart contracts for music rights a couple years ago. They also just recently released an entire album on the Ethereum blockchain and are doing some really cool stuff around artist badges and identities and profiles. They're also a partner. And then the last shout out goes to George Howard, who's going to be talking more about what the DMS is doing. I don't know if I've said it yet, but the DMS is the Decentralized Music Society. George Howard is from the Open Music Initiative and co-founder of TuneCore. And he will be going into these issues in quite a bit more detail. I'm not sure what the time is like, so we may just have a lot of time for questions. So that's basically it. So music rights, blockchain.
Amazing stuff, Peter, but that we knew before. I think we're going to cut it short to one question, because sure. Then we can move on to the schedule. So we have one right here.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I'm Colin Miller. I work for Hubert Burda Media. It's one of the largest media companies in Europe. And we discuss blockchain technology a lot because we have similar problems as the music industry. Just when I look back 20 years ago, when the web came up, the publishers, they tried to webify their old processes, their old products, their old businesses, and we all know what happened then. They weren't successful. When we discuss all those blockchain solutions for royalty payments, for photos, for videos, for whatever, for music, my biggest concern is that we all only speak about blockchainifying the old systems that don't work today. And I think, or maybe we should think about, will they work just because we blockchainify them? Mm-hmm. So this is not a real disruption, and I think we should try harder. What do you do about that?
Okay, so I think the disruption for blockchain is coming in a different form and would probably be a little bit more complicated to explain in just a very short pitch. It is super important that the industry shift to blockchain accounting, essentially, because, as I mentioned, it's taking forever for artists to get paid, and a lot of that is because the databases don't match up, or the formats that everyone's using don't match, and so that data moves very slowly. And so everybody's looking at this. GEMA, ASCAP, and PRS, or no, I'm sorry, not GEMA, SACEM in France, PRS, and ASCAP in the United States have formed a partnership to use IBM technology to build a system. We have actually, via BigChain, been talking to GEMA, and so there's Spotify. They acquired MediaChain, a blockchain startup out of New York. Everyone's looking at it because the need is so real. And so while I totally agree with what you're saying, that it isn't just about looking back into the past, there are some tremendous opportunities, I think, coming that when we start to think about the intersection of identity, messaging, decentralized information sharing, profiles, there's lots and lots of opportunities. It just kind of takes a bit longer to unpack all those points. But that stuff's coming too. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give some cheers for Peter.